Everyone backed away from the alien princess, except one crazy human. The air in the grand proving ground of Cathar was thick enough to taste, a dense alloy of ozone, hot stone, and anticipation. Thousands of Cathar, a species of powerfully built feline predators, packed the tiered stands that rose like the ribs of some colossal fossil. Their collective gaze was fixed on the arena floor, on the lone figure of their princess. Princess Zarya stood motionless on the sun-bleached sand, a breathtaking and terrifying vision. A fine coat of cobalt blue fur covered a form that was all lethal muscle and predatory grace. Her armor, a masterpiece of blackened, articulated plates, left her powerful midriff and the swell of her bosom exposed, not out of vanity, but as a declaration of confidence. Two sharp, velvety ears, the same deep blue as her skin, twitched atop her head, catching the slightest shift in the air. Her tail, long and powerful, lay still on the sand behind her. It was her face, however, that held the crowd captive. High cheekbones, a sharp jawline, and full lips were framed by a mane of azure hair, and her eyes, wide and feline, were the color of molten gold, glowing with an internal light that promised either ecstasy or oblivion. She was a warrior of legend, a commander who had shattered rebellions with savage efficiency. Yet today she was being publicly undone. "Let the rite of ascension continue," the herald's amplified voice boomed across the arena. "Princess Zarya, first of her line, calls for a champion. Who will bear her honor? Who will fight for her claim to the obsidian throne?" The question fell into a well of profound and deliberate silence. In the champions' gallery, 100 of the Empire's most decorated warriors stood, their powerful forms clad in the armor of their clans. The herald's call was their cue. One of them was meant to step forward, to pledge steel and life to her cause. Not a single warrior moved. A low murmur rippled through the stands. Zarya's golden eyes swept over the gallery, her gaze as sharp and heavy as a blade. One by one, the champions she met eyes with looked away. Some offered a barely perceptible shake of the head. Others simply lowered their gaze to the floor, a gesture of profound disrespect. They feared her temper, her ruthlessness, her curse. To fight for her was to invite her volatile wrath, a fate many considered worse than death in the arena. Her cousin, Prince Kaelin, watched from his own royal box, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. His champion, a mountain of scaled muscle and 4 arms, known only as the Draknar Behemoth, stood behind him, a living embodiment of the brute force Kaelin represented. He had secured his champion on the first day. Zarya had none. Her humiliation was his victory. In the diplomatic gallery, Angel, first attaché of the Terran Confederacy, watched the scene unfold. He leaned forward, his knuckles white on the polished stone railing. He saw past the fearsome warrior. He saw the slight tremor in her hands, clenched into tight fists at her sides. He saw the rigid set of her jaw as she fought to maintain her composure. He saw a woman utterly and completely alone, cornered by the very power that was supposed to define her. His security chief muttered beside him, "Political suicide. No one will back her." Compassion was a dangerous luxury in galactic politics. An alliance with the Cathar was vital for humanity's future, but that alliance was brokered on strength and stability. This display was anything but. Yet, as the silence stretched, becoming a weapon in itself, Angel felt an entirely undiplomatic surge of indignation. The herald cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. For the third and final time, does any warrior answer the call of Princess Zarya? The finality of the words hung in the air. Zarya's shoulders for the first time seemed to slump. It was a minuscule movement, almost imperceptible, but in it, Angel saw the breaking of a spirit. And he moved. He didn't think. He simply acted. He straightened his simple, dark gray diplomatic uniform, walked to the edge of the gallery, and in a voice that was calm, clear, and carried across the now deathly quiet arena, he spoke. Every head, from the lowest commoner to Prince Kaelin, snapped toward him. The sheer audacity of it was a physical shock, a human. A soft, clawless, furless, tailless human diplomat. Zarya's head whipped around, her golden eyes locking onto him. The initial shock on her face was instantly consumed by a wave of pure, unadulterated fury. This was not salvation. This was the ultimate insult. Angel met her burning gaze without flinching, his expression one of quiet resolve. He had just thrown himself into the fire. He could feel the heat of it on his face, radiating from the golden eyes of the princess he had just sworn to champion. The antechamber behind the royal box was silent, but it screamed with tension. The stone walls seemed to sweat, the torchlight flickering nervously in the oppressive atmosphere Zarya generated. She wasn't pacing, she was circling. Like a great cat inspecting a strange new creature that had wandered into its territory, she moved around Angel with a liquid grace that was both mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. Her tail lashed the air behind her, a slow, deliberate beat that marked time in the suffocating silence. Angel stood perfectly still in the center of the room, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He kept his eyes on her, a sign of respect in human culture, a direct challenge in Cathar. Finally, she stopped directly in front of him, so close he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. She was a full head taller than him, a column of coiled power and fury. The rich, clean scent of her fur filled his senses, a wild, untamed fragrance like a storm breaking over a forest. "Do you know what you've done, human?" she asked, her voice a low guttural purr that vibrated in his chest. "I have answered your call, princess," Angel replied, his tone even. Her lips pulled back from startlingly white, sharp teeth. "You have made a mockery of me," she hissed. "You have turned my humiliation into a farce. Did your superiors put you up to this? Is this some subtle Terran insult I am too primitive to understand?" "No one put me up to anything," he said. "My superiors are at this moment likely deciding on the most efficient way to recall and professionally execute me. I acted alone." Her golden eyes narrowed, studying his face, searching for the lie. He saw the conflict in them, the ingrained warrior's contempt for his perceived weakness clashing with a flicker of confusion at his utter lack of fear. Every other being in her presence, even her most loyal attendants, carried a baseline of terror. He did not. "Why?" The question was sharp, a dagger's point. "Because a champion, even an unconventional one, is a better political statement than no champion at all," he stated simply. "Your cousin wants you to appear abandoned, isolated. I have denied him that. You are still in the right. That is all that matters." She stared at him for a long moment, the tip of her tail twitching. His logic was sound, infuriatingly so. He had used her own political rules against her rival. With no other choice, and with the entire empire as witness, she was bound to him. "You understand I will not protect you in the arena," she said, her voice cold as the void. "The moment you step onto that sand, your life is your own. When you are broken and bleeding, it will be your own fault." "I understand perfectly, Princess," he said. "Then you are a fool." "History is filled with useful fools, Your Highness." A muscle in her jaw jumped. She turned away from him sharply. "The training grounds, at dawn. Do not be late." With that, she swept from the room, leaving him in a silence that felt louder than her anger. Dawn found him on the gray, packed earth of a private training ground. He was dressed in simple fatigues, a stark contrast to Zarya, who arrived clad in a close-fitting leather harness that accentuated every deadly line of her body. She carried 2 training blades, curved and wicked-looking even with blunted edges. She tossed one at his feet. "Pick it up," she commanded. The moment he did, she attacked. There was no warning, no ceremony. She was a blur of blue and black, a whirlwind of motion. Angel barely managed to get the blade up to block a strike that would have shattered his ribs. The force of the blow vibrated up his arm, staggering him. He saw it then. This wasn't training. This was punishment. This was an attempt to make him quit, to beat the foolishness out of him so she could be done with the embarrassment. She was relentless. He was outmatched in every conceivable way: strength, speed, reach, instinct. He spent the first hour on his back, the wind knocked out of him, his body a canvas of burgeoning bruises. Her attacks were a fluid, brutal dance, and he was a clumsy partner constantly tripping over his own feet. She disarmed him, tripped him, threw him, but every single time, he pushed himself back up. He'd wipe the dust from his face, retrieve his blade, and settle back into a defensive stance, his eyes never leaving her. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to learn. He watched her feet, the shift of her hips that preceded a spin. He noted the way she favored her left side for wide, sweeping attacks and her right for quick, stabbing thrusts. He was a diplomat, a negotiator. His mind was his greatest weapon, and right now it was working furiously, absorbing, analyzing, and cataloging every scrap of data in the storm of her assault. Finally, drenched in sweat and breathing heavily, she paused, her chest heaving. He stood before her, bruised and swaying slightly, but still standing, still watching. "Why do you keep getting up?" she demanded, her voice laced with grudging frustration. "Because you haven't taught me how to stay down yet, Princess," he replied, a small, weary smile touching his lips. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a wave of sound that crashed against Angel as he walked onto the arena sand. They were not cheering for him. It was a sound of derision, of contemptuous laughter and jeers. His opponent was already waiting, a Cathar named Grorn, a mountain of striped orange fur and muscle, who had publicly mocked Zarya's choice of champion. Grorn grinned, showing a row of formidable teeth, and made a show of flexing his brawny arms. Angel ignored it all. He gave his head a slight shake, focusing his thoughts, blocking out the noise as he had been trained to do in 1,000 hostile negotiation rooms. He walked to his designated starting point, his borrowed training blade held loosely in his hand. He glanced up at Zarya's royal box. She sat rigid and proud, her face an unreadable mask of sculpted cobalt. Her golden eyes met his across the expanse of the arena. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. He was ready. The herald's cry signaled the start of the match. Grorn charged, a bellowing avalanche of fury, his heavy blade held high for a crushing overhead blow. It was exactly what Angel had expected. He did not meet the charge. At the last possible second, he dodged to the side, his movement economical and precise. Grorn, carried by his own momentum, stumbled past, his sword carving a deep furrow in the sand where Angel had been standing. The crowd laughed, thinking it a fluke. Grorn roared in frustration and charged again. Again, Angel sidestepped, a matador avoiding the bull. He didn't attack, didn't even raise his blade to defend. He just moved, his feet light on the sand. He used the entire arena as his canvas, leading Grorn on a chase. The bigger warrior was all power, but his stamina was being taxed with every missed thunderous blow. A sheen of sweat began to glisten on his orange fur. His breathing grew heavy. Angel, meanwhile, was conserving his energy, his breathing steady and controlled. He was using the oldest tactic in the book. Let your opponent defeat himself. During their brutal training sessions, Zarya had inadvertently taught him how to anticipate a Cathar's charge, how to read the subtle tensing of the leg muscles, the slight dip of the shoulder. He was using her own lessons against one of her own kind. "Fight, you coward!" Grorn bellowed, his voice hoarse. From her box, Zarya leaned forward, her knuckles white where she gripped the railing. Vorlog, her aged advisor, stood beside her, his expression grim. "He mocks our ways," Vorlog rumbled. "This is not honorable combat." "Be silent, Vorlog," Zarya commanded, her eyes never leaving the human. She was beginning to see the method in his madness. It was not cowardice, it was strategy. Grorn, his patience gone, abandoned all technique and launched himself at Angel in a wild, desperate tackle, dropping his sword. He intended to crush the smaller man with his bare hands. This was the moment Angel had been waiting for. As the massive body hurtled toward him, Angel didn't retreat. He stepped forward into the attack. He dropped low and pivoted, placing his foot and hip in precisely the right position. It was a move from a human martial art designed for a smaller person to use a larger attacker's weight and momentum against them. He didn't lift Grorn, he guided him. The Cathar warrior, expecting to collide with a solid object, found only empty air and a fulcrum point. His huge body was sent cartwheeling over Angel's hip. He landed with a sickening crunch, his shoulder hitting the hard-packed sand at an unnatural angle. A sharp crack echoed through the suddenly quiet arena. Grorn howled, a sound of pure agony, clutching his dislocated shoulder. He tried to rise but collapsed back, his face a mask of pain. He could not continue. Angel stood over him, breathing calmly, not a scratch on him. He looked at the downed warrior, then back up at Zarya's box. Silence. A vast, echoing, galaxy-sized silence descended upon the grand proving ground. Thousands of Cathar stared, their minds unable to process what they had just witnessed. The tiny, fragile human hadn't landed a single blow. He hadn't broken a sweat, and he had won. Then the herald, his voice shaking slightly, found his words. "Victor, by forfeit, the champion of Princess Zarya." The words seemed to break the spell. A wave of confused, angry, and astonished noise erupted from the crowd, but Jeria didn't hear it. She was still staring at Angel, at this impossible human. A slow, unfamiliar sensation bloomed in her chest. It was not gratitude. Not yet. It was a spark. A bright, burning flicker of intrigue. The scent of medicinal herbs and sterilized bandages filled the air of Zaria's private chambers. It was a sterile smell, but underneath it was something else, something far more potent, the heady, musky scent of Angel's blood. He sat stripped to the waist on a low couch, his torso a roadmap of livid bruises from their training. A shallow, weeping cut from a blunted edge marred the skin over his ribs. Zaria knelt before him, her movements precise and efficient as she cleaned the gash. Her claws, usually weapons of terrifying potential, were retracted, and the pads of her fingers were surprisingly soft against his skin. A lock of her azure hair fell forward, brushing against his shoulder. He did not pull away. In Cathar culture, tending another's wounds was a deeply intimate act, a gesture of respect and acceptance into one's clan. For a princess to do so for a champion, an off-world champion no less, was unheard of. Her advisor Vorlog had protested vehemently, but she had silenced him with a single sharp glance. "You took a foolish risk," she said, her voice a low rumble. Her golden eyes were focused on her work, but he could feel the intensity of her gaze as if it were a physical touch. "Calculated, not foolish," Angel corrected softly. "I knew Grorn's pride would be his undoing. I just had to give him enough rope to hang himself with." "Rope?" she asked, her brow furrowing in confusion at the human idiom. "An expression," he explained. "I allowed his own aggression to become my weapon. It was the only way I could win." She finished dressing the wound, her hand lingering for a fraction of a second on his side. The contact sent a jolt through him, a current of warmth that had nothing to do with the injury. She sat back on her heels, looking at him, truly looking at him for the first time. She saw the network of old scars that crisscrossed his torso, testament to a life that had been anything but diplomatic. She saw the unwavering steadiness in his dark eyes. "The way you moved, the pivot," she said, her voice losing its edge of command, replaced by genuine curiosity. It was not a Cathar technique. "No, it's called Aikijujutsu. It is a defensive art. It teaches one to blend with an opponent's motion to redirect their force rather than meet it head-on." She considered this, her sharp mind processing the strategic implications. "Strength against strength is our way, the strongest survive." "And what happens when you are not the strongest?" he countered gently. "What happens when you face an opponent like Grorn, who is stronger but slower, or an opponent who is faster but weaker? Strength is not the only variable, Princess. There is also balance, timing, and strategy." A new light entered her eyes. The next day, their training was different. The raw brutality was gone, replaced by a focused intensity. She still attacked, but now, when he failed to block or evade, she would stop. She would guide him, physically moving his limbs, her hands firm and warm on his skin. "Your stance is too wide," she would murmur, her breath ghosting across his ear as she adjusted his feet. "You are leaving your core exposed." He, in turn, pointed out things she had never seen. He showed her how her most powerful attacks also created the largest openings. He taught her feints, misdirections, how to use her opponent's expectations against them. The physical contact was constant, necessary, and it wove a silent, charged current between them. He learned the texture of her fur, the solid power of the muscles moving beneath. She learned the surprising resilience of his human body, the heat of his skin. One afternoon, she had him in a hold, his back pressed against her front, her arm across his throat in a simulated choke. He was defeated, his breath caught in his lungs. But instead of releasing him, she held the position, her body a warm, solid wall against his. He could feel the soft fur of her cheek against his temple, the steady, powerful beat of her heart against his spine. The scent of her, wild and clean, enveloped him. "You are a surprisingly effective student, Angel," she whispered, her voice a husky vibration against his skin. The use of his name, not his title, was as intimate as the embrace. "I have a good teacher," he managed to reply, his own heart beginning to hammer against his ribs for a reason that had nothing to do with the fight. She loosened her grip but did not step away. The air crackled, thick with unspoken things. This was no longer just about the right. It was about the dangerous, intoxicating scent of trust and the unexpected territory it was leading them into. The second round of the right was designed to be Angel's end. Prince Kaelin, infuriated by the humans' first victory, had adjusted the rules. Angel would not face one opponent, but two, a pair of lithe, vicious Cathar twins known for their silent, coordinated attacks. It was an open secret that Kaelin had paid them handsomely to ensure the Terran champion left the arena in pieces. In the hours before the match, Angel and Zarya stood over a sand table in the training grounds, mapping out their strategy. The easy, charged intimacy of their recent sessions had sharpened into a shared, focused intensity. "They will try to flank you," Zarya said, her clawed finger tracing two converging lines in the sand. "One will draw your attention while the other strikes from your blind spot. It is a classic hunter pair tactic." "So I don't let them," Angel replied. He swept a hand through the sand, erasing her lines. "Instead of an open field, what if it's a bottleneck?" He drew a narrow channel in the sand. "If I can force them into a space where they can't get around me, I neutralize their greatest advantage. I only have to fight one at a time." Her golden eyes lit up with understanding. "The broken pillar on the eastern side of the arena, it creates a narrow passage against the outer wall." "Exactly," he said, meeting her gaze. A silent understanding passed between them, a perfect synchronization of her warrior's knowledge and his strategic mind. "I just need a reason to get them to follow me there." When the match began, Angel put their plan into motion. He presented himself as an easy target in the center of the arena, looking nervous and out of his depth. The twins, sleek and arrogant in their matching black leather armor, took the bait. They began to circle him, their movements perfectly synchronized, closing the net. Just as they were about to strike, Angel bolted. He ran, not with the desperation of prey, but with a calculated purpose, heading directly for the designated point. As he predicted, the twins' predatory instincts kicked in. They gave chase, their superior speed eating up the distance. Angel ducked behind the massive fallen stone pillar, forcing himself into the narrow, claustrophobic space. The twins arrived a second later, snarling in frustration. Their flanking maneuver was useless here. The first twin entered the passage, blade held ready, confident in his one-on-one superiority. But Angel was not the same fighter he had been. Taught by Xeria, he met the attack not with a clumsy block, but with a fluid parry that deflected the blade. He used the close quarters to his advantage, stepping in to deliver a series of short, sharp strikes with the pommel of his sword to his opponent's joints, just as Zarya had shown him. The warrior recoiled, his arm going numb. Before the second twin could push past his sibling, Angel pressed his advantage, disarming the first and using another swift, efficient takedown to leave him incapacitated on the ground. He turned just as the second twin lunged, meeting the attack with a newfound confidence. The fight was short, brutal, and decisive. Angel, using a combination of human strategy and Cathar technique, was the one left standing. The arena was, for the second time, stunned into silence. He had not just survived, he had dominated. As the herald declared his victory, a triumphant, genuine smile broke across Zarya's face. She rose from her throne, her pride in her champion radiant and unmistakable, but her triumph was short-lived. Prince Kaelin rose from his own seat, his voice amplified to carry across the entire stadium. "A stirring victory for the unconventional champion," he said, his tone dripping with condescending poison. "Such unexpected success calls for a truly fitting final trial. It is time to dispense with these simple duels and honor the ancient ways." A nervous murmur swept through the crowd. Zarya's smile vanished, replaced by a cold dread. Kaelin's smirk widened. "I invoke the clause of the Wild Hunt. The final trial will not be a duel between champions. It will be a test of true Cathar supremacy. The heirs and their champions will be released into the perilous wilds. The last one standing claims the throne." The announcement hit the arena like a physical blow. The rules had not just been changed, they had been shattered. The Great Hunt was a brutal relic of a bygone era, a blood-soaked tradition abandoned for centuries. The perilous wilds were a massive enclosed jungle preserve on the moon, filled with the most dangerous predators the Empire had ever catalogued. Zarya stood frozen, the blood draining from her face. She was no longer a spectator. She was no longer safe in her royal box. Kaelin had not just found a way to kill her champion, he had found a way to hunt her himself. She was prey, and her only ally in the coming slaughter was the human standing on the sand below, his own look of shock mirroring her own. The transition was jarring. One moment they were in the sterile, controlled environment of a transport ship. The next, the ramp lowered with a hiss, and the air of the perilous wilds flooded in. It was a living thing, thick with the smell of damp earth, decaying vegetation, and the alien musk of 1,000 unseen creatures. The humidity was a physical weight, instantly beating on Angel's skin. Towering, bioluminescent flora cast the jungle in an ethereal, shifting glow of sickly greens and purples. "You have one cycle," the transport pilot's disembodied voice crackled over a speaker. "Survive, hunt, or be hunted. The right ends at dawn." The ramp slammed shut and the ship lifted away, its engines whining into silence, leaving them utterly alone. The change in Zarya was instantaneous. The regal princess was gone, replaced by the predator. Her posture lowered into a slight crouch, her golden eyes scanning the dense, menacing jungle, her ears swiveling independently to catch the faintest sound. Her tail swayed slowly, testing the air. "This way," she whispered, her voice a low growl. She moved with a silent, fluid grace, her body blending into the dappled shadows. Angel followed, his senses on high alert. He was out of his element, a creature of sterile corridors and climate-controlled rooms thrust into a primordial world. But his mind was already working, assessing, analyzing. The plants were a source of light, but also of deep shadow. The ground was soft, muffling footsteps, but also holding tracks. He kept his hand near the survival blade strapped to his thigh, a pitiful weapon against the horrors this place likely held. Their partnership, forged in the training ring, now faced its ultimate test. Her instincts were their guide, his strategic mind was their map. She could identify the call of a predator from a kilometer away. He could look at a ridge and determine the most defensible position to spend the night. They had been moving for hours when she suddenly froze, holding up a hand. Angel stopped behind her, every muscle tensed. She pointed to the ground. In the soft mud was a track, massive and reptilian, and beside it a smaller booted footprint. "Kaelin," Zarya breathed, her lips pulling back in a snarl. "And his Draknar." "They're moving east," Angel observed, his voice low, "toward the rock spires, probably looking for a high vantage point. We should go west, put as much distance between us as possible until we know the terrain." "No," Angel said quietly, "we do the one thing they won't expect. We follow them." Zarya turned to him, her golden eyes wide with disbelief. "That is madness. The Draknar is a monster. In this environment, it could rip us both apart before we could even react." "Which is why we won't fight it," he countered. "Not yet. We'll shadow them, learn their patterns. Let them lead us to water, to shelter. Let them clear the path of lesser threats. Knowledge is our most valuable weapon right now, Zarya, and they're gathering it for us." She stared at him, her warrior's soul screaming that it was cowardice, that it was the tactic of prey. But the cold, hard logic of his plan was undeniable. He was asking her to suppress every instinct she had. He was asking her to trust him. "All right, human," she finally conceded. "We do it your way." Later, as the strange, multicolored moons of the planet began to rise, they found a shallow cave carved into the base of a massive, glowing fungus. It was barely a shelter, but it was defensible. The temperature had plummeted, and a cold mist was rolling through the jungle floor. Angel shivered, the thin material of his uniform offering little protection. Zarya, covered in her thick coat of fur, seemed unaffected, but she saw his tremor. After a moment of hesitation, she moved to sit beside him, her back against the cave wall. Then she did something that stunned him into stillness. She unfurled her long, powerful tail and wrapped it around his waist, pulling him closer until his side was pressed firmly against hers. The heat from her body was immediate and profound, a living furnace against the cold. Her fur was unbelievably soft. "For warmth," she stated, her voice carefully neutral, as if it were a purely tactical decision. "Right," he said, his own voice a little tight. He was acutely aware of every point of contact between them, the press of her thigh against his, the solid wall of her torso, the astonishing softness and strength of the tail holding him. He could feel the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. The air in their small shelter grew thick, charged with a different kind of heat. The barriers between them, already weakened, were beginning to dissolve in the heart of the perilous night. The hunt, the danger, the world outside their small cave faded away, leaving only the two of them, huddled together in the alien darkness. They shadowed Kalen and his Draknar champion for the better part of a cycle. From a safe distance, they watched the hulking behemoth tear through the undergrowth, swatting aside predators that would have been a lethal threat to Angel and Zarya. Kalen followed in his wake, arrogant and insulated from the true dangers of the wilds by his living weapon. As Angel predicted, the duo inadvertently led them to a source of clean water and revealed pathways through otherwise impassable terrain. But Angel was watching for something more. He studied the Draknar, noting its lumbering gait, its reliance on overwhelming brute force, and its surprising vulnerability to loud, high-frequency sounds, which caused it to roar in agitation and clutch at the sides of its scaled head. "He's a hammer," Angel whispered to Zarya as they hid in the dense fronds of a massive fern, watching their quarry below. "He's looking for a nail. He has no finesse, no strategy beyond direct assault." "He doesn't need it," Zarya countered, her gaze fixed on the creature's 4 powerful arms. "That hammer can shatter stone." "Every weapon has a weakness," Angel murmured, his mind racing. "We can't fight him head-on, but we might be able to outthink him. We might be able to separate him from Kalen." He turned to her in their hiding place, the bioluminescent light casting strange shadows on their faces. "I have a plan," he said. "It's risky. It will require perfect timing and for you to do something that goes against your every instinct as a warrior." She looked at him, her golden eyes searching his. The trust between them had been solidifying with every shared hour of danger, every quiet glance of understanding. "Tell me," she said. "We set a trap. Not for the Draknar, but for Kalen. We use his arrogance against him." Angel's plan was complex. It involved using a narrow canyon, a series of tripwires made from tough vines, and a cluster of shrieking flora that reacted to vibration. The goal was to trigger a rock slide, separating Kalen from his champion, leaving the prince vulnerable. "You want me to run?" Zarya asked, her voice tight with disbelief. "You want me to act as bait, to lure them into the canyon and then flee while you trigger the trap?" "I want you to be the distraction," he corrected gently, his voice earnest. "You are the one thing Kalen cannot ignore. Your presence will fix his attention. He won't be watching the ground. He'll be watching you. It's the only way it works." He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before he rested it on her armored forearm. His touch was warm and steady. "I know this is not your way. Your way is to meet a threat head-on. But my way is to live to fight another day. I need you to trust me, Zarya, not just my strategy, but me." She looked from his hand on her arm to his steady, determined eyes. He was asking her to place her life, her claim to the throne, everything on his intellect. He was asking her to be the shield while he acted as the sword, a complete reversal of their expected roles. In that moment, surrounded by a jungle that wanted to kill them, she felt a profound sense of clarity. Her old way had led her to humiliation in the arena. His way had brought her victory and had kept them alive. A slow nod was her answer. "I will do it," she said, her voice firm. A new fire lit her eyes, not of anger but of fierce protective loyalty. "But if your trap fails, human, I will tear him apart with my bare hands." "I'd expect nothing less," he replied with a small smile. They spent the next few hours meticulously preparing the canyon. They worked together as a seamless unit, their movements economical and synchronized. He would point out the weak points in the rock face. She would test the strength of the vines. There was little speech, only the shared language of purpose. The intimacy between them had been forged in training and tempered in the cold of the night, but here, in the shared, deadly work of the hunt, it was honed into something unbreakable. They were no longer princess and champion. They were partners. They were a single, cohesive weapon, and they were about to turn the tables on the hunters. The air in the narrow canyon was still and heavy. Zarya stood at the far end, a deliberate, challenging silhouette against the glowing foliage. She was the bait, and she played her part to perfection, letting the arrogance radiate from her posture. "Kaelin," her voice rang out, sharp and clear. "Are you hiding behind that pet of yours for the entire rite, or will you face me?" As they'd anticipated, the taunt was too much for her cousin's ego to bear. Moments later, Kaelin appeared at the canyon's entrance, the Draknar behemoth lumbering at his side. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across his face. "So, the little mouse has decided to roar," he sneered. "A fatal mistake. Seize her." The Draknar charged, its heavy footfalls shaking the ground. This was Angel's cue. Hidden on the ridge above, he pulled the main tripwire. It worked flawlessly. The vibrations triggered the shrieking plants, which erupted in a deafening high-frequency cry. The Draknar stumbled, clutching its head and roaring in agony and confusion. At the same moment, the tension-cut supports for the rock face gave way. Boulders and scree cascaded down, not on top of the Draknar, but in a curtain behind it, completely sealing the canyon entrance. The trap was sprung. Kaelin and Zarya were on one side of the rock slide. The Draknar was on the other. Kaelin stared at the wall of rock, then at Zarya, his eyes wide with shock and fury. He was alone. For the first time, he was without his shield. "You," he spat, drawing his own blade. "Clever trick, cousin, but you forget, I am still a true Cathar warrior." He lunged at her. The duel was everything the rite should have been from the start. A raw, brutal confrontation between the two heirs. But Zarya was no longer the same warrior who had entered the arena. She fought not just with strength, but with strategy. She remembered Angel's lessons, parrying, redirecting, using Kaelin's aggressive lunges to create openings. She was a whirlwind of cobalt fur and blackened steel, her movements a deadly dance. Kaelin, for all his bluster, was outmatched. She disarmed him with a fluid wrist lock and kicked his legs out from under him. He landed hard on his back, the obsidian throne lost to him. Zarya stood over him, blade at his throat, victorious. But on the other side of the rock slide, the Draknar was recovering. With a roar of pure rage, it began to punch at the rock wall, its four fists acting like living pile drivers. Boulders cracked and flew. It was tearing its way through. Angel, his role in the trap complete, scrambled down the ridge to join Zarya. "We have to go," he yelled. "Now!" Zarya looked from her defeated cousin to the crumbling wall of rock. But before she could move, the Draknar burst through in a shower of stone and dust, its eyes burning with mindless fury. It didn't see Kaelin on the ground. It saw only Zarya, the source of the sound, the one who had tricked it. It charged, its massive claws extended, aiming for a killing blow. Zarya was off balance, her victory over Kaelin having left her momentarily exposed. She tried to raise her blade, but she wasn't fast enough. She never felt the blow. Angel moved without thinking, his actions driven by a fierce, protective instinct that defied all logic and self-preservation. He threw himself in front of her, pushing her back as he took the full, brutal force of the Draknar's attack. A clawed hand as large as his torso raked across his chest and side. The impact threw him through the air like a rag doll, and he landed in a heap a dozen meters away, unnervingly still. A sound of pure, untamed rage tore from Zarya's throat. It was not a word, but a primal scream of loss and fury. Her golden eyes blazed, no longer molten but white-hot suns. The princess, the strategist, the woman, all of it was burned away, leaving only the apex predator. She fell upon the Draknar and the still dazed Kaelin with a speed and savagery that was terrifying to behold. It was not a fight, it was an execution. When the red mist cleared, she stood panting over their broken forms, the undisputed victor. Then the fury vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold, gut-wrenching terror. She sprinted to Angel's side. He was lying in a rapidly spreading pool of his own blood, his chest torn open in 3 deep, gruesome furrows. His breathing was shallow, his eyes closed. She dropped to her knees, her hands hovering over him, shaking too much to touch him. She had won the throne, but the price was the life of the one person who had believed in her. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Zarya's heart. She knelt beside Angel, the victory turning to ash in her mouth. The throne, the empire, it all meant nothing if he died here on this patch of alien soil. With a resolve born of pure desperation, she suppressed her terror. She tore strips from the hem of her own tunic. her hands finally steadying as she pressed the makeshift bandages against his grievous wounds. The dark, warm blood soaked through them almost immediately. "No," she whispered, the word a raw, broken thing. "You will not die. I forbid it." His life was draining away with every shallow breath. The extraction point was kilometers away, across treacherous terrain. Leaving him to get help was not an option. He would be dead long before she could return. There was only one choice. Gently, with a tenderness that belied her immense strength, she gathered him into her arms. His head lolled against her shoulder, his body limp and frighteningly light. She rose to her feet, his weight a precious, terrifying burden, and she began to run. She ran with the last of her reserves, her powerful legs eating up the ground, her lungs burning. She leaped over fallen logs, scrambled through thorny thickets, and waded through waist-deep streams, all while holding Angel protectively against her chest. The jungle that had been their hunting ground was now just an obstacle, a hateful thing standing between him and survival. During a brief, gasping pause for rest under the shelter of a giant leaf, she looked down at his face. It was pale, his lips tinged with blue. His skin, usually warm, was growing cool. A terrible keening sound built in her chest. She bent her head, pressing her forehead to his, her soft fur a stark contrast to his clammy skin. "Stay with me, Angel," she murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You foolish, brave, impossible human, you were not supposed to do that. That was my fight." Her confessions tumbled out in a torrent of whispered words, meant for him alone, conscious or not. "You saw me when no one else would. You stood for me. Everything I am about to become, it is because of you. Do not leave me to face it alone. Please." She adjusted her grip and ran again, fueled by nothing but fear and a desperate, burgeoning love. When she finally burst into the clearing of the extraction point, she was a terrifying sight. A warrior princess covered in dirt, gore, and the blood of her own champion, who she clutched like a priceless treasure. The automated system recognized her as the sole survivor. The rite was over. The transport descended, its ramp lowering to receive the new ruler of the Cathar Empire. She did not bask in her victory. She stormed up the ramp, brushing past the stunned medics who rushed forward. "Prepare the Royal Medical Bay," she commanded, her voice raw with authority and desperation. "Every autodoc, every regenerative specialist. Now! If he dies, I will dismantle this ship plate by plate." Back on the capital ship, she refused to leave his side. She stood watch as the advanced medical technology of her empire went to work, nanites knitting torn flesh, machines stabilizing his fragile life signs. Her loyal advisor Vorlog found her there, standing vigil beside the transparent stasis field. He saw her expression, the fierce, protective terror in her golden eyes, as she watched the human's life hang in the balance. He saw the way her hand rested on the field, directly over Angel's heart. The old Cathar's expression softened. He had served the royal line his entire life. He had watched Zarya grow from a fierce cub into a feared princess. But he had never seen her look like this. The warrior had found her match. The princess had found her anchor. Vorlog bowed his head, understanding that the ascension of Empress Zarya was not the only momentous change the empire would face. Everything was different now. Angel awoke slowly, swimming up from a deep, black ocean of unconsciousness. The first thing he registered was a profound lack of pain. The second was a soft, steady pressure on his hand. He blinked his eyes open, the light of the medical bay a gentle, diffuse glow. His gaze traveled down his arm to his hand, which was resting on a crisp, white sheet. Another hand was holding it, a hand with fine, cobalt-blue fur and gently curved, retracted claws. His eyes followed the arm up to its owner. Zarya was slumped in a chair beside his biobed, fast asleep. Her head was pillowed on her arm, her magnificent azure hair in a state of disarray. Her armor was gone, replaced by a simple, soft tunic. The fearsome warrior princess looked utterly exhausted, and surprisingly young. Even in sleep, her grip on his hand was firm, resolute, as if she were afraid he might drift away. He watched her for a long time, the steady beep of the medical monitors a quiet counterpoint to the powerful emotions welling in his chest. He remembered the canyon, the flash of the Draknar's claws, the searing agony, and he remembered throwing himself in front of her. He felt no regret. As if sensing his gaze, her sharp ears twitched. Her golden eyes fluttered open, at first clouded with sleep, then widening with shock and overwhelming relief as they met his. "Angel," she breathed, her voice husky. "Princess," he replied, his own voice raspy. "Or should I say Empress?" A small, weary smile touched her lips. She squeezed his hand. "You are awake." It wasn't a question, it was a prayer of thanks. The power, the titles, the entire universe seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of them in the quiet room. The unspoken things that had crackled in the air between them for weeks finally had room to breathe. "I thought I lost you," she said, her voice soft and vulnerable in a way he had never heard. "You're not that easy to get rid of," he said gently. "Besides, I had to see how the story ended." She leaned forward, her expression intensely serious. "This is not the end, Angel. This is the beginning." Days later, the grand hall of the Obsidian Throne was filled to capacity. The Cathar nobility, clan leaders, and representatives from a dozen star systems had gathered for the coronation of Empress Zaria. She stood before them, radiant and powerful, clad in new armor inlaid with silver that gleamed like starlight. The crown of Cathar, a heavy circlet of black metal and precious gems, rested on her brow. She accepted the fealty of her subjects with a grace and gravitas that left no doubt as to her right to rule. When the ceremonies were complete, she raised a hand for silence. "I have one final decree to make on this day of my ascension," she announced, her voice ringing with a newfound tempered strength. "The Cathar Empire has long stood alone. That isolation ends today. I hereby declare a full and formal alliance with the Terran Confederacy, to be bound by trade, by mutual defense, and by honor." A murmur of surprise went through the hall. An alliance with the soft-skinned humans. "Furthermore," Zaria continued, her golden eyes sweeping the crowd, daring any to challenge her, "in any great partnership, there must be balance. A warrior's strength must be tempered by a scholar's mind. A ruler's power must be guided by a compassionate heart." She turned and extended her hand. From the shadows beside the throne, Angel stepped forward. He wore a formal Terran diplomatic uniform, but he moved with a new confidence. A faint network of scars on his chest was visible at the collar, a permanent reminder of the price he had paid. He walked to her side, not behind her, and took her offered hand. Their fingers, one furred and clawed, the other smooth and human, intertwined. "I present to you my chosen consort," Zaria declared, her voice filled with a pride that transcended politics. "Angel of Terra. He faced our traditions when no other would. He championed my cause with a mind that proved sharper than any blade. He will stand with me to guide this empire into a new age." They stood together before the throne, a united front. The human who had refused to back away from the fearsome alien princess, and the empress who had found her strength not in being feared, but in being loved. The silence of the hall was broken, not by murmurs of confusion, but by a rising, thunderous roar of approval for the new, unexpected face of the empire.